Okay, for those of you that are rewatching this at a later time, this is my take number 2. I did 11 minutes of video that just didn't feel right. So I had to stop and delete that video and start over. I watched my video from last week, and there's some things that I noticed that I wanted to change. Some areas that I didn't feel quite prepared, and I wanted to have something a little bit more prepared. And in doing that, I feel like I got too analytical about it, and inspiration just doesn't work that way for me. So I like it kind of like the way I do my massage. I like to have all of the anatomy and all of the stuff there to refer back to if I need to, but really what happens is what's happening in the moment, and that is where it feels the easiest and the best for me. So I don't want to get caught up in all these details that I went over. I'm just going to touch on things as they come up, because I trust that. I have a lot of practice with that, and it's less stressful for me that way. So let's just see where inspiration leads us. So the components that we went over last week in NonViolent Communication, which is a book by Marshall Rosenbergs, chapter 1 talks about the 4 components. And don't worry, I'm not going to repeat this as much as I did last week, because we have a lot of information to cover in chapter 3, and we probably won't get through it today. So chapter 1 is dealing with our internal connection so that we can respond to what's happening in our environment instead of reacting. Right? We react off our emotions, but we respond with thought when we have some type of connection to the information that's coming in. And so nonviolent communication helps us by getting us to observe what's outside or inside what's happening, connect the feeling, the need, and then ask for a request if needed. So, gets us in the moment. It really gets us focused on all the right things, all the internal things that help us respond. The second part of chapter 2 is I want this video to be perfect. I'm realizing this in myself because I'm getting frustrated with all my owns and all the pauses, and I want you to see this because it's important. I don't need to be perfect to tell you about something that's really of value to me. So let's go from that intention. How does that sound? Chapter 2 was about the many faces of judgment. So we had moral judgments versus value judgments. Moral is the good, the bad, the ugly, and value judgments are more like preferences, strong preferences, things that you have experience with, And then another face of judgment would be comparisons. And then we had a long list for language that defers responsibility. So I'm going to turn to that page for that list. And that was vague and personal forces, the actions of others, that dictates authority, group pressure, institutional policies, rules and regulations, gender roles, social roles, or age roles, and uncontrollable impulses. So that's language that implies the absence of choice. And then finally, demands. Those are all the faces, many faces of judgment. But chapter 3, we're going to separate judgment and just get our observation. So we're going to see some more faces of judgment, the more covert faces of judgment. It's really that judgment that keeps us from connecting from the heart, right? It's hard to hear yourself be judged. So chapter 3 is distinguishing observations from evaluations. And evaluations are a type of judgment. And we have a couple different types here and examples, so that'll be nice. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is judgment is still an interpretation. Like, really let that sink in. Judgment is still an interpretation. And this story in the book really exemplifies that. Page 28 of the book, under the heading, The Highest Form of Human Intelligence, Marshall Rosenbergs describes an experience of some teachers that were frustrated with the principal at their school. And so we asked them, what is the principal doing that conflicts with your needs? And the first teacher says, well, he has a big mouth. So Marshall talks about, well, that gave him some information on how the teacher evaluated the principal, but it didn't describe what he said or did that led to this interpretation of having a big mouth. So then he asks the second teacher, and that teacher says, the principal talks too much. So that's also another evaluation of how much the principal talks, but still no specific details about what he's saying or doing. And then the third teacher says he thinks only he has anything worth saying. So that's inferring what another person is thinking, but not observation. And then the fourth teacher says he wants to be the center of attention all the time. Again, another inference of what another person is wanting. So here you have 4 different people looking at the same behavior of the principal and making judgments, evaluations, inferring, and it's all different, right? This is what I'm talking about. Judgment is still an interpretation. So he's got a big mouth, he talks too much, he thinks only he has anything worth saying, and he wants to be the center of attention all the time. Those are very different judgments. They're very different intentions, right? So, but what's really cool is when they actually get to the specifics of what the principal is doing, it actually becomes more coherent. like there's not a lot of different ways to interpret what you're actually seeing. So when they actually figured it out, it was that he told stories about his childhood and war experiences during faculty meetings, which caused the meetings to run over time. One interpretation of that. So that's very handy. That's what we can do with observation, right? We can take a lot of the judgment and the interpretation out of it. So, all right. Distinguishing observations from evaluations. There's a nice grid on page 30 that goes through the different nuances, right? When we use the verb to be without indication, that the evaluator is taking responsibility for an evaluation. So if I were to say, you are too generous, versus when I see you give all your money away, I think you are being too generous. So in that case, you're being very specific at what you're seeing. When I see you give your money away, I think you're being too generous. So I'm speaking my judgment, that it's mine, it belongs to me. I think that you are being too generous. It's different than you are too generous. So I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a huge shift in how we're relating to ourselves and other people. Being able to own and be responsible for my fear of, well, what if you run out of money, or why I'm labeling that as being too generous, or why being generous would be bad in that case. That's all inside of me. That's all going on inside of me. So the use of verbs to evaluate connotation. So Doug procrastinates. Right, so procrastinates is open for interpretation. People do that in many different ways. What am I seeing that is procrastination? So Doug studies for exams the night before. Some people, depending on their habits, that might not necessarily be procrastination. And I think I'm touching on a really good way to approach the evaluation and put it into an observation. So the next one is an implication that there's only one possible outcome. So she won't get her work in. Versus, I don't think she'll get her work in. That's where, again, I'm owning the words of I don't think she'll get her work in. Or she said, I won't get my work in. Fourth is confusion of prediction with certainty. If you don't eat balanced meals, your health will be impaired. So where's the personal responsibility? Where's the part of me that's speaking from here? So if you don't eat balanced meals, and again, balanced is open for interpretation. So I might say, if you don't eat some vegetables with your meat and with your protein and carbohydrates, I fear your health may be impaired. And impaired is kind of a interpretation too, right? I fear there'll be consequences to your health down the road, you know. So the next one is failure to be specific about what you're referring to. So the example here is immigrants don't take care of their property versus I have not seen the immigrant family living at 1679 Ross shovel the snow on their sidewalk. This is very different. This is a lot of this is that vague impersonal forces, right? 6, use of words denoting ability without indicating that an evaluation has been made. So, the example for that is Hank Smith is a poor soccer player. So poor, that's open to interpretation. Like soccer player, we all know what that is, right? But poor, how? How is he being poor? What quality? Hank Smith has not scored a goal in 20 games. So that's a little more specific. So it's really just not being as vague. Use of adverbs and adjectives in ways that do not indicate an evaluation has been made. So the example here is Jim is ugly versus Jim's looks don't appeal to me. Or Jim's looks don't appeal to the last 5 women I asked. So without the book, these would be kind of hard to remember, but to me it's, gosh, it's hard to, anyways, I'm just going to keep going. We'll let that marinate in the back of my subconscious. The words always, never, ever, whenever, only, frequently, seldom, those are all often provoke defensiveness. So examples, you seldom do what I want versus the last 3 times I initiated an activity, you said you didn't want to do it. That's very specific, right? How many of us are really present enough to remember? He frequently comes over. What's frequent to you? What's frequent to me? What's frequent to the person across the street? He comes over at least 3 times a week. So I think a lot of that is just vagueness, is being more specific. And here it's talking about static generalization, so that vagueness really is just this out of the moment, right? So our brain doesn't have to work as hard. We don't have to sit there and pay attention to what's going on around us. Observations are made to be specific to time and context. So in the moment, observations are made to be in the moment. So it's a long list. I think we'll go through it again next week as well. Maybe I'll have some better examples, or additional examples. In fact, I think the workbook has some. So I'm going to open up to that page. And these I have highlighted. So we're going to go through a couple more examples of judgment or evaluation versus observation. So you have to attend school until you're 16. That's the demand of you have to, right? So without that demand, it's we'd like you to attend school until you're 16 because we value a solid education. And solid, again, is one of those vague words. So you can even be more specific and say something like, because we value education, or we feel that education is a way to get a high-paying job. I mean, whatever your values are centered around, that's where you want to talk about that. But again, having to. People like their autonomy. They want to be free to choose. Sometimes, I guess. Some cultures, not so much. They want the wiser, more experienced people to choose for them. And I guess that obviously, everything has its advantage and disadvantage. So So deserve-oriented language would be like people who hurt others deserve to be punished. Well, we talk about justice, right? So, the nonviolent communication way to speak that would be, I'd like to see people who hurt others be given the opportunity to make amends for harm they caused, because I value healing and restoration of trust. Now, that is a compassionate sentiment, but it doesn't have to be, like, it can still be put in nonviolent communication with a different value attached. Like, I'd like to see people who hurt others be given the opportunity to make amends for the harm they caused, you know, while they're sitting in a jail cell. Yeah, I'm just not feeling very connected today. I think I started with this a little bit too in the details. Trying to figure out how to change that in the future. Do I want to just put out a 24-hour notice when I'm feeling like doing one of these? Interesting. Okay, so let's move on. The doctor knows best. That is a denial of responsibility. Without that denial, we would sound like, we ordered this test because we were hoping to get some definitive results. I would enjoy receiving your trust in my judgment of this matter. So there's a lot of different examples separating observation and evaluation. Also creating a space to include your needs and your feelings in what you're talking about. Creating that bridge to share an internal part of yourself with somebody else and with yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and put that book down. And I'm just going to sit here and think about or feel what comes up. Feel free to do the same. I have all these things that I highlighted that I wanted to say, and I don't want to just read off of a piece of paper. So I have, we all use our choice independently, right? What that means is we all interpret. We all use our judgment to interpret in a way that makes sense for us. And we are not carbon copies of each other. So judgment in itself, again, is an interpretation. We like to think that when we use vague language like Rick being a poor soccer player, or you're being too generous, that they have the same definition. And if you look in a dictionary, well, actually, if you look at different dictionaries, they don't. They do have the same type of intention, but not always the verbatim definition. And what makes it more convoluted is they don't have the same value. That's the biggest part, is they don't have the same value to each person, right? Too generous to me is different than what value somebody has for generosity, right? Your relationship with generosity may be completely different than my relationship to generosity. My experience, my practice, my beliefs, they all go into my value of generosity. So that's the problem with judgment and interpretation, is that our value, our needs that are being met are different. On a bigger scale, most of us do have similar needs, and I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 4 about the list of needs, right? I think we all have a need to be loved and accepted. We all have a need to be touched in a safe and loving way. Animals and humans die when they're young for failure to thrive if they're not touched and connected. So chapter 4 is feelings, but I want to get to needs, so we'll go to chapter 5. This feels much better. Where are you, chapter 5? Wow, feelings is a long chapter. Chapter 3 is like insanely, it's like 5 pages, but there's so much to it. Chapter 4 is so much more. Lots of feelings. Where are our needs here? Lots of feeling. What's happening here? Acknowledging needs. Did they put it all together? Here we go. So these are basic human needs that we all share. Now, our interpretation is going to be different based off our individual nuances, like choosing one's dreams, goals, and values. Our dreams, goals, and values may be different, but when we're allowed to choose them without consequence, without punishment, I'll say, it feels good. That's kind of where this is getting at. To choose one's plans for fulfilling one's dreams, goals, and values. To celebrate the creation of life and dreams fulfilled. To celebrate losses, loved ones, dreams, etc. So mourning, it's a basic need to mourn. Playing, fun, and laughter. Physical nurturance, so air, food, movement, exercise. Protection from life-threatening forms of life, like viruses, bacteria, insect, predatory animals. Rest, sexual expression, shelter, touch, and water. On the spiritual plane, basic needs that are listed in this book are appreciation of beauty, harmony, inspiration, order, and peace. If we look at interdependence, so what we get with one another in between, acceptance, appreciation, closeness, community, consideration, contribution to the enrichment of life, to To exercise one's power by giving that which contributes life. So giving from the heart. Emotional safety. Empathy. These are all alphabetical. Honesty. The empowering honesty that enables us to learn from our limitations. So it's not honesty like, it's not the hardness of honesty. It's the softness of honesty. It's honesty that's given with love. Love is the next one. Reassurance, respect, support, trust, understanding, and warmth. So those are the basic needs that are listed in the book. And when we have feelings that are good or bad, the good feelings are usually because our needs in these categories are being met. And they're usually not, they don't feel good when our needs from these categories are not being met. So for those of you who care to create the fail-safe of logic and intellect, feelings can really be broken down in this systemic way. If you're feeling negatively, a need is not being met, either by you or somebody else. If you're feeling positively, then there is a need that's being met by you or somebody else, or both. So I'd invite you to get really familiar with these needs. I'm sure there's more needs than that, and only you can truly know what it is that you need when you take the time to listen. So, needs create feelings, and feelings can create behavior, thoughts. So that comes to my next subject about our culture. A lot of our culture is about being external. It's about needing the approval of people around you instead of having your own internal approval or trusting that your internal approval is enough. Because what happens when your internal approval is enough? Let's take some time to think about that. What happens when you value your own and trust your own decision-making process? Is that a scary thought for those of you out there? How would that change to have that type of confidence or certainty, I guess? For me, I see that as empowerment. That's a lot of empowerment, and it leads to more powerful choices. So when you're connected to your feelings and your needs, you're making choices that are benefiting you. All right, so what time is it now? Let's see. We got some more time here. If there are anybody that has comments, you feel free to type them. Any questions, anything that you want to share. I'm just going to go through and see what grabs my attention. I did have this written down, that experience creates new information, new knowing of ourselves and our perception of the world. So experience can do that for you. I invite you to become more conscious and intimate with your values and your needs. Instead of looking at just the external result, get connected to the internal reason of a need being met or not met. That's your homework this week, is to go through and notice when you feel something good about the situation that's going on around you, and ask yourself, what need is being met here? And then when you don't feel good, say, what need is not being met here? And you don't have to think of it in terms of what the book gave us. Just asking that question should bring something up in your imagination. So, for example, I told you this was my second take of this video because my first one I just felt discombobulated and under lots of pressure that I put on myself to be perfect and to get things to run smoothly. And that those are very, it can happen that way when it's in the moment, but it just wasn't feeling that way for me, because in using that thinking, I also added what's going to happen if it's not perfect, right? There's some consequence that I don't like, that doesn't feel good. So there was that need to have autonomy, right? The need to just be who I am as I am and have acceptance. So that was an inside job. That was me putting pressure on myself. And that did not feel good. But what feels good now is this. To allow myself to be in the moment, to make mistakes, or whatever you would want to call them, and to be in acceptance of myself. That feels good. And that's also an internal job too. Inside job. So to be more conscious with your choices, you need to show up for yourself. Discover what influences your thoughts and motivates your behavior. And those are needs, my friend. Needs that are being met and needs that are not being met. It's always going to come back to that. And codependency, same thing. They talk about needs. What's the need? So this week is about your needs. Figure out what your needs are, what's important to you. Any questions? So I want to go back over the language that employs lack of choice. We talked about this in chapter 2. When we give away responsibility. So when we disown our choice, we make ourselves a victim. When we give the responsibility for what we're choosing to somebody or something else, we are accepting ourselves as a victim. We are getting into the role, right? I have no choice. That's the biggest difference between somebody who is victim and somebody who is empowered, is choice, options, lots of options. So even when we're choosing something we don't want, we're still have an empowerment of choosing, of standing in that choice to say, I don't really like this food or this food, but I am hungry, or I'm not hungry. Maybe I don't want to eat at all. So, but a choice is being made. Don't defer your choice. Even if it's a choice you don't like, maybe you don't want to accept the consequences of that choice. Maybe you don't want to be punished or have somebody say that you deserve it, right? Maybe like me, you just want to be able to make a mistake and still be loved. So we get a lot of blame and punishment if we fail to comply in this culture. That's one need, is to be able to be human. So, one need for me. Well, I can't think of anything else that I want to talk about. Your homework for this week is to identify your needs. I know that's not in line with what is in chapter 3, because chapter 3 is talking about separating evaluation from observation. I feel that's a lot better if we can identify our needs. Maybe that's what we can do, is I'll go to the, maybe we'll skip chapter 4 and read chapter, let's see here. Yes, so chapter 5 is taking responsibility for our feelings, but they're doing that by identifying your needs. So we're going to skip chapter 4. We're going to go to chapter 5, and we're going to read about our feelings, or excuse me, our needs. I think it's easier to go from needs to feelings than the other way around. As far as chapter 3, it's a bit difficult to vocalize that without interaction. But my best advice would be, don't assume that every definition is the same. So when I say, like these examples, when I say Doug procrastinates, you kind of have an idea of what that looks like or feels like, but specifically, what is Doug doing that would make that judgment of procrastination from me? What do I see? So I see that Doug studies for exams the night before. So for chapter 3, I would say get more specific. Don't let one word do it. Like, be in the moment. You know, observations are about what's happening specifically in that time. So, vague language, vague definitions, excuse me. If you have any questions, please type in the comments. So, static generalizations. Observations are made to be specific in time and context. That's the best advice I can give you for chapter 3. Static generalizations are usually evaluations. So the words that we have definitions for, right? Beautiful, because beautiful is all about value, right? Across cultures, there's different forms of beauty. Tattoos, neck rings, blonde hair, blue eyes, blemish-free skin. So there's a, beauty, nothing is really very standard. It's all about what you're being taught. It's all about what you're being raised in. So observations are made to be specific to time and context. That takes a lot of the interpretation out. That gets people more on the same page. That's chapter 3. So, skipping chapter 4, reading chapter 5, which is about our needs. Throughout the week, try to identify when you're not feeling good about something and when you are feeling good about something, and then the need that is being met when you feel good and the need that is not being met when you feel good. That's what I'd like you to do this week. As far as last week, we were going to look at the news, movies, listen to ourselves, listen to other people, to find any of the hidden forms of judgment. Did you guys see a lot of that? Were you surprised by how much there was? Was it difficult for you? Was it really easy? I'd love to know all of those things. So if you'd be interested in having a more interactive meeting, please type in the comments. We can get a Zoom meeting or Skype or FaceTime or whatever the agreed upon medium would be for that. All right, well, thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next week, or I still haven't figured out how I want to do that. So, anyways, blessings.